Let's get started here. This virtual global agenda that addresses systemic racism and sustainable changes that people of color can make within the US and around the world in order to affect a positive change. By outlining concrete action steps, our goal is to create sustainable solutions. So oftentimes you go to summits and you hear panelists and all they talk about are the problems. Well, tonight we want to address those issues, and we also want to put forth actual items and agenda that we can all follow on one accord to affect sustainable change. Our position as a group of concerned citizens is that institutional change can be ushered in and supported by our personal and professional lifestyles, daily choices, and civic engagement. So, to serve as your MC for tonight, we have Jabari Smith. Jabari Smith is an international orator and TV host, an intercultural facilitator. He's a social entrepreneur, a leader, and a coach. With over 25 countries under his belt, he is a true global citizen. Now, he's a proud native of New Orleans, Louisiana, and he's on a mission to uplift and inspire lives across the globe, while as a mentor and advocate for youth, young professionals, and aspiring entrepreneurs. Through his company, Jabari Inspires, Jabari does motivational speaking and global citizenship consulting. Now, after graduating from the Mecca, Howard University, as a fellow alum and great friend of mine, he earned his bachelor's in broadcast journalism. Jabari taught English in Japan for 2 years as a participant in the Japan Exchange. He was the only foreigner living in the rural town of Fujisaki, Aomori, and first Black person ever to reside there. So in 2012, he helped to re-elect US President Barack Obama and Vice President Joe Biden as an Organizing for America youth outreach coordinator and field organizer. He's a self-proclaimed lifelong learner. Leadership training from the Kauffman Foundation's New York City-based program, and in 2010, the Amani Institute's Nairobi-based program. Upon extending his stay in Kenya, Jabari served as the Chief Operating Officer of Africa Community Development Media. Now, that is just a very short snippet of who Jabari is, and I'm going to bring him to join me now on stage so that he can go ahead and take over.
I'm doing so great, Jeanette. Thank you. Thank you so much for that warm introduction. It's an honor and a true pleasure to be a part of this event. So I'd like to extend those greetings to everyone who is participating as well, all of our panelists, all of our guests and organizers. Once again, it's a true pleasure and privilege to be a part of this event, but also particularly to collaborate with you, Jeanette, a dear friend since our days as undergraduates at Howard University. And truly, I'm excited to serve as the MC for the Global Agenda Summit this evening. Jeanette mentioned that I am
Well, Jabari,
continue.
I'm gonna let you go and take it over from here. I just want to say thank you so much for accepting the invitation, and I know the event is in good hands.
It is. As Jeanette stated, I am a native of New Orleans, Louisiana. And to give you all a bit of background about myself before we delve into the meat of the event, growing up in New Orleans made culture, particularly Black culture, a source of inspiration for me. So certainly continuing my journey at Howard University further affirmed that feeling. However, it really wasn't until I moved beyond the borders of America to Japan that I fully understood the weight of our influence globally. While working as a teacher in Northern Japan, as Jeanette previously stated, I was the only foreigner and first Black person to ever live in the rural town of Fujisaki. Initially, everywhere I went, I was called 50 Cent, Diddy, Will Smith, Obama Sensei, as this was during President Obama's first term. And all of this helped to drive home the value of not only stepping beyond my comfort zone to learn about other cultures, but also, and equally importantly, stepping outside of my comfort zone to teach my culture to others. As an American, particularly as an African American. 5 years after leaving Japan, my appreciation for my African American heritage was heightened when I moved to Nairobi, Kenya in 2013. What was initially meant to be a 2-month stint studying social entrepreneurship and peace building evolved into an unforgettable 4-year journey in which I hosted my own TV series, Jabari Inspires, which chronicled my motivational work with youth across East Africa. This experience ultimately allowed me to gain a more in-depth understanding of the breadth and depth of our history as people of African descent, and ultimately how this history has shaped our entire world. Now, needless to say, I am immensely passionate about engaging with people from across the world about not only issues, but more importantly, solutions that can change the society we live in. And certainly change is what we all desire in 2020. What a year, right? From global social unrest and protest, from New York City to Lagos, Nigeria, like we have never seen, to a global health pandemic like we have never imagined we'd experience, resulting in over 220,000 deaths in the US alone and millions unemployed. The issues that we continue to grapple with as a society are overwhelming and painful. But that is certainly why we are here tonight, to focus our attention and energy on understanding our history and struggles while creating sustainable solutions for the way forward. It is my honor to introduce our first speaker, Mr. Clarence Tiger Davis. He was born in Georgia and graduated from the Paul Laurence Dunbar School in Baltimore, Maryland. He then enlisted in the US Air Force and served from 1960 to 1964, after which he was accepted at Morgan State College, where he earned his BA. In 1978, he also earned his master's from Morgan State. Tiger is a member of the Veterans of Foreign Affairs, Vietnam Veterans of America, and is a regional coordinator for the National Association for Black Veterans. He is a former American politician who represented Maryland's 45th legislative district located in Northeast Baltimore in the Maryland House of Delegates. He also served as the state president for AARP. Tonight, Clarence Tiger Davis is here to tell us the truth about the US Confederacy. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome Mr. Clarence Tiger Davis to the stage.
Everybody always wanted what Africa had. Africa was rich in minerals or what have you. Europeans wanted those minerals, but they also wanted that labor. And so what happened is that the Europeans come together because Bismarck called them together, say, hey, look, let's not fight over this. There's plenty here for everybody. And so they carved up Africa. You know, historians will refer to that as a scramble of Africa, and or the final solution would be the bifurcation, you know, of Africa. Okay, they conquered everything except Ethiopia, and that's where the family of Haile Selassie maintained control. That whole line of Ethiopians had maintained a strong nation. In fact, they even defeated Mussolini without any help from the Europeans. But all peoples in the world have experienced the subjugation and conquest of the Europeans. Okay, now, when you talk about the historical record, the question is who controlled that historical record? We are fortunate because we have a lot of great historians like Anta Diop. We have John Henry Clark. We have Dr. Benjamin Carls, John Franklin, and a host of other great historians all over the world who are revising the historical record and bringing forth the truth. Now, it is very difficult for religions and you know, and look, I don't care if you're Catholic, Baptist, or whatever. I don't care. Are part of the problem. religions split people and cause people to fight against one another. And so all religions, as well as ethnic groups, try to control the historical record. They want to present their version to the world. Now, one of the things that, one of the groups that I am very proud of is a group in Latin America or South America called the Minority Rights Group. In 1995, they concluded a study of Afro-Latin Americans entitled No Longer Invisible. In the introduction, Pedro Perez and Gene Stubbs in the opening paragraph states, race and ethnicity are a social construct rather than a biological fact, particularly in the case of Latin America, where people of African, European, and indigenous ancestry have intermixed through generations to an enormous degree. The study demonstrates that Latin Americans of African ancestry have historically been oppressed and neglected, almost all descended from slaves, and numbering perhaps 125 million. That was the figure in 1995, because as most of you probably know, in places like Brazil in 1948, nearly half the population was pure African. Now, while Afro-Latin Americans frequently challenge their oppression with some success and have seen many aspects of their culture absorbed into the mainstream Latin American life, persistent myths of colorblind racial democracy mask the insidious and often brutal reality of the discrimination they face. In other words, they try to say that, hey, we ain't got too much of a problem here. We're all Latinos or what. No, that's a major problem throughout Latin America. In fact, if you look at Brazil right now, there are so many homeless children running through Brazil, and businessmen and economic interests hire assassins to go out and kill these kids on the street because they don't want them within their society. So one of the things that we have to do, because we're talking about global here now, is first begin with our area in the Western Hemisphere. Look all over the Western Hemisphere to include the Caribbean, and let's understand that, okay? Now, although Afro-Latin Americans is the most interesting topic, time will only permit me to discuss, to focus on the United States and the prevalence and longevity, of the Confederacy. And previously, I gave you information on these doctors and other political people who made certain statements about the inferiority of African people, and this is ingrained in them. They have difficulty seeing otherwise. But from the voyages of Christopher Columbus, African people were here. They were here on that voyage. They came here on the in 1619. So they have been here. And furthermore, during the American Revolution, Crispus Attucks, and we all know he was the first to die, but he was followed by more than 9,000 people of African heritage who fought for the United States or the rebels. Now, that was another 9,000 or so that fought with the British because the British promised them freedom. But let's take a look at one who fought for the Americans, a gentleman by the name of James Forten. He was captured at the age of 14 by the British, placed in a POW camp. And the commander of the camp saw this kid and saw his intelligence. And so he tried to get the kid to travel to England and go to school. He was going to send him there to go to school. But that young James Forten said to the major, I am a patriot, and I will endure that which all of my comrades endure. Okay, and he stayed here. But the story doesn't end there. He comes home, he becomes a sail maker, an apprentice sail maker. He bring about so many technological advances to the sail making industry that eventually he bought out the owner. And then he became the wealthiest man in Philadelphia. This is James Forten. He provided not only funding for the Underground Railroad and other initiatives of African people, he also provided funding for all of the municipal buildings and the beautification, of Philadelphia. And it's only been since 2014, that Philadelphia has begun to recognize him. Now, we look at those who fought with the British. The British tried to fulfill their promise to those who fought with them. They took some to the Caribbean, and they sent others up to Nova Scotia. Some they took to England. One of the gentlemen who was sent to Nova Scotia was named Thomas Peters. Thomas Peters will organize his people, and eventually they will travel to Africa, where they found the modern-day state of Sierra Leone. African people have always been in the forefront of progress, in this world. Now, as we move forward, now, a lot of people have no knowledge of this, and they will act as if African Americans never fought or did anything. But in 1851, William Cooper Nell, a pioneering historian, published the first documentation on African American patriots entitled Colored Americans and the Wars of 1776 and 1812. In 1855, he published Colored Patriots of the American Revolution. Mr. Nell was an activist in the anti-slavery movement and was a key member of the Underground Railroad until his health forced him to withdraw. His life would make Martin Luther King's work seem menial. We have always been blessed to have great men like them, but we can also look in the scientific area. And I don't have time to get into that, but many of the inventions that whites took credit for was the result of African Americans. And so we move forward to the Civil War. Abraham Lincoln had no idea that African people had fought in the Revolutionary War and had been on the front lines defending this country from day one. But Frederick Douglass and others erased his ignorance and enlightened him. And he then allowed blacks to participate. And I forget the exact number, but nearly 30 African Americans received the Congressional Medal of Honor. And when they achieved these things, they achieved it under the most difficult, of circumstances. And then after that, the Western frontier could not have been opened. One of the greatest hurt that I have ever felt. There was a guy named Dennis Means and Russell. They were Sioux Indians. I always talked about the Buffalo Soldiers and honored the Buffalo Soldiers. Those who know me know we do a banquet every year. Well, Russell Means and I had a falling out about that, because through his eyes, the Buffalo Soldiers enabled the Europeans to commit genocide against his people. And so while I continue to pay tribute and honor to the Buffalo Soldiers, I do think of Russell Means at all times. Now, we've served in every war. We've been the difference between winning and losing every war. If you look at the historical record from the perspective of whites, African Americans and our own leadership perished the same lies They're not serving combat arms units and all of this. Come on, come on. If you look at World War II, you got the Tuskegee Airmen. You got the 761st Tank Battalion, the best in Europe. You have the 333rd Artillery Unit, which was the best in Europe. You got the 92nd Infantry Division. Spike Lee did the movie on them. You have extraordinary heroes throughout this history, but they are hidden. They never receive the awards. And the problem is our leadership is ignorant and parrot the same thing that white folks say, that blacks did not serve in combat arms unit. The historical record, even today, remain in the domain of the conqueror, and in particular, the Southern or Confederate view of history. Northerners know better, but did not have the courage or will to stand up. There was very little difference between a Southern white and a Northern white, both of whom saw the African American as competition. Now, and I know I may be running out of time, but I'm going to take a couple extra minutes because I want to talk about people like W. Du Bois and all of his contribution. What about George Washington Carver? I mean, where would the petroleum industry or the plastic industry? Look at all that he has done. If you go back to Benjamin Banneker, but not only these, there are so many whose names are obscure in today's society. But African people have always been in the forefront of developing this country, and we've done it under such duress. Let's take a look at our economics, because that's what we're going to be talking about today. Every time Black folk built something, like in Tulsa, some people call it Black Wall Street, enemies come and burn it down or destroy it because they're jealous. We've seen the movie on Rosewood. What about Columbus, Tennessee? All you have to do is key into your computer riots or violence perpetrated against African Americans, and this stuff will come up. And we're facing the same kind of thing today with this militia movement. And some of you may not understand how this played out after the Civil War. After the Civil War, the Redeemers, these are the Confederates. The Ku Klux Klan evolved out of them. They wanted to keep the blacks on the plantation to do the work, but blacks had other ideas, and they organized and planned the Exodus. And you know, the gateway to the West was St. Louis. Well, the violence perpetrated by these paramilitary groups brought fear to the mayor of St. Louis, and he would not allow blacks to come through there because they had threatened them. That sounds like what's going on up in Michigan right now, isn't it? And some of the threats that's going on all over the place. So history has a way of repeating itself. But one of the things we have to do now, and I think the summit is right on point, we have to begin to bring our people together to discuss some of our issues and to come up with a plan so that we can begin to move our people forward. And I think at this particular point, I'm going to slow down and give it back to Jabari. Jabari Smith, are you there?
Sir. And sir,
if you're not, I'm going to roll on.
Well, I hope you plan to stay around for the remainder of the event, because we may pull you into other aspects of tonight's program, if you don't mind.
I will be
Okay,
here.
great.
Hey, I'm a Morganite.
So you're always ready, huh?
Always.
Well, I do want to thank you for the history lesson that you gave us, Tiger. The wealth of names, dates, and events that you shared are such integral, yet often, sadly, unsung elements of our history. So I hope that many of you in attendance were taking notes, because I certainly was. And I really feel that it's imperative that we remain aware of the issues that not only permeate our present day reality, but also the issues that our ancestors have battled with throughout previous decades and centuries, not only in America, not only in Africa, but in every nook and cranny of the world. Two of your talking points, Tiger, that stood out to me the most were that many people are ignorant to the history and greatness of Africa, as well as the fact that Africa brought civilization to the world. Sadly, this ignorance is not only on the other side. And when I say the other side, I mean this is not only ignorance that is harbored by people who are not Black or African American. This is ignorance that even people within our own community harbor. So events like this certainly help to further educate us and equip us and arm us with the knowledge that is necessary to truly develop solutions that solve the issues that we've been battling with for, once again, decades and centuries. Now, I'm excited to move into our social injustice panel. We have dynamic guests who will provide us with information, insight, and solutions to affect positive change. I'd like to take a few minutes before we begin that panel to introduce our panelists. First, we have Dr. Bernd Rader. Bernd Rader is a professor of political science at Texas Tech University. He served as the director of the Institute for the Study of Latin America and the Caribbean at the University of South Florida, and he is the editor of Routledge's Decolonizing the Classics special book series. Before joining academia, he worked as a social worker and NGO consultant in Brazil and in Colombia. He earned his PhD in comparative politics from the City University of New York's Graduate Center and has been a visiting scholar in Germany, Brazil, Colombia, and Spain. His work focuses on democracy, race, and decolonization. That is Dr. Bernd Rader. Our second panelist is Dr. Marjorie Innocent. Dr. Marjorie Innocent is the National Health Director of the NAACP. As Senior Director of Health Programs, Dr. Marjorie leads the development and management of the NAACP's program and policy agenda to advance equitable solutions to health disparities for African Americans. She also collaborates with internal and external colleagues to advance public discourse about the intersection of health and other social issues impacting people of color. As a health policy professional, Dr. Innocent has served as Vice President of Research and Programs at the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation in Washington, D.C. Dr. Innocent earned a Doctor of Philosophy degree in Health Policy and Management from the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health in Baltimore, and a Bachelor of Arts degree in Political Science and French Literature from Columbia College in New York. That is Dr. Marjorie Innocent. Our third and final panelist will be Mr. Ryan Washington. Ryan is a native Washingtonian who grew up in Anacostia. Ryan became civically engaged at age 12 after witnessing high levels of violence in his community. Ryan joined the DC Youth Advisory Council to advocate for safer communities in Southeast DC and other parts of the city. While in high school, Ryan served as a youth mayor of DC and helped implement the city's first anti-bullying policy in DC public schools. Ryan interned at the US Senate, US House, and Department of State for the duration of his undergraduate career. Ryan is a recent graduate of Howard University, my beloved alma mater, Jeanette's beloved alma mater, where he studied political science with a concentration in pre-law. Ryan works for the Far South Collaborative, a nonprofit in Anacostia, and he is currently running for the Board of Education because he understands the unique challenges and needs of students, parents, and teachers in Ward 8. That is Mr. Ryan Washington, DC Ward 8 Board of Education candidate. I'm sure this will be a very robust conversation. Ryan has joined us. Welcome to the discussion, Ryan.
Thank you.
And congratulations on recently graduating from Howard.
Thank you. HU.
You know.
I just have to share this really quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Ward 8 is being represented really well. I'm not originally from there, but that sure is where I've been living for the past 12 years.
Okay. Where are you originally from?
Originally from New York City, but I've been living on Talbot Street. So Ryan will know what I'm talking about, right by El Metro.
Yes.
Yep, right up on the hill.
Well, I'd like to jump into the discussion And I'll start with you, Dr. Byrne. And I want to make sure I'm pronouncing your name properly. It's Byrne.
I'm German, so it's Bernd, but it's all right.
Bend.
But
Okay.
I go by Bernard. It's a hard one for most.
But Bend is
Bernd. It's E-R-N-D, so it doesn't matter.
Bend. Okay, I'll work on that.
Okay.
I like to pronounce people's names properly.
Okay.
So you have worked as a social worker in Brazil and Colombia. I imagine through that experience, you saw and learned a lot. How does life in those countries for people of color differ from those who live in the United States?
So Jabari, thank you very much for inviting me. I feel honored to be part of this group, and I want to thank you and Jeanette, of course, for making this possible. I think it's a very interesting thing to, it's something that is dear to my heart, to stop talking about problems and start talking about solutions and ways forward. I think that's a very interesting touch to this. So, as you said correctly, I spent actually 2 years when I was in my early 20s in Colombia doing social work. I worked with abandoned children, and then in the Pacific coast of Colombia, in the Chocó, it's a Pacific region there in Colombia. And then I spent some years in Brazil as a social worker as well, doing slum urbanization projects and consultancy. So, the sad truth is that, there's a lot of debate in academia about race relations in different places. And there is a long history about particularly comparing Brazil to the US, and you will find, people arguing about the differences. And there certainly are differences in that, I would contend that there is no clear take on the race category in Latin America. You ought to have kind of a more fluid categorization of people, but the end result, sadly, it seems to be the same everywhere, no matter where you go, no matter how the categorizations are, because at the end of the day, the darker you are, the lower down you are on the ladder of any sort of hierarchy you can think of, and that matters. And the lighter you are, the higher up you are. And of course, I experienced this my own self as a German. Anywhere I go, I'm credited with, I have symbolic capital. Nobody doubts my abilities. Everybody thinks I'm smart, I'm beautiful, all of these things. This is, and look at me, it's not driven by me. It's the symbolic capital of whiteness and of Europeanness that is everywhere the same. Everywhere I've been, I have seen and witnessed the same, sadly.
And your experience actually reflects what I've seen in my experiences living internationally, whether it be Japan or even in Africa. And I often say that one of the starkest, one of the most interesting things that I have not been able to shake from my memory is stumbling upon exclusively white spaces in Africa, and seeing firsthand the privilege that white people are afforded to this day in Africa. And certainly, as you said, it's not because of merit. It purely relies on skin color.
Yeah.
So
I have witnessed the same. I've been in West Africa. I've been in, I know about, this is very, very common everywhere you go. So this is a sad global story.
For sure.
Even in the places where you least expected. Yeah. So I guess we have some shared experiences, even though I experienced the opposite end of it, I guess. I'm afforded privilege.
It's a very deep conversation. I could also say that, and not to harp on this topic for too long, but even as an American in Africa, I experienced privilege. I experienced what I would consider Black privilege.
Of course.
And I often say that traveling internationally as an African American affords me an opportunity to actually exploit my Americanness and truly maximize the benefits of being an American in a way that I'm not able to maximize in my own home country. And for many Americans, many of my white friends or colleagues or associates, they're so taken aback when I say that, because it's an experience that they can't relate to. However, it is a reality.
It's not surprising, these are kind of, I tend to argue always that, racial regimes are national regimes, and depending on each country's history of colonization. So I lived in Portugal for a while, and in Portugal, people from Latin America, Spanish-speaking people in Latin America, are considered kind of interesting exotics, whereas Brazilians, their own former colonial subjects, are looked down upon. And then you cross the border, you go 10 miles to the east, and you're in Spain, it's the opposite. Brazilians are valued as exotic, exoticized also, but they're valued, whereas Mexicans, for example, are perceived as, the former colonials. So there's a long history, of course, of African-American presence in France, and we see this played out in sometimes a very uncritical fashion also, because we know that as an American, you might do well in France, but if you look at what happens to North Africans in France right now, it's not a rosy picture. So
I'd like to pose the next question to all of our panelists. So some may find the term Black on Black crime offensive, since it has been used to counter the notion that there is systemic racism. But let's be clear that it's not our intention to do that in this discussion. However, I would like to discuss the violence that takes place within communities of color by those within the same community. For all of you, what can we do to address this issue, and how do we provide support and resources that offer alternative ways to prevent and or mediate these situations? And that's open for anyone to respond to.
Well, I think that's a great question, Jabari. There really isn't one answer to that question, right? I think that we have to come together and figure out how we can attack this issue from multiple different angles. But I do think that one is mental health resources. We have, as a community, as the African American community, we've not fully healed from the long, deep-rooted trauma that we've experienced in this country. And we see in our communities that the violence, right, the violence that was endured during the very beginning stages of this country are now alive and well in some of our communities, specifically in Ward 8. We have some of the highest rates of violence in the city. And so figuring out how do we, at a point where we can still sort of reach some of our people, how do we implement strategies where we are teaching young people to deal with trauma, to work through emotional distress, to understand their emotions, etc. But I don't think that there's one answer in particular. I think that we have to figure out multiple strategies to tackle that issue.
Thank you.
So
I completely agree.
Fully agree with Ryan as well. I think that in addition to what he just talked about, I think there is what I'll call a very important elephant in the room that we cannot ignore. There are Black communities throughout this country, right? And we'll see, especially in certain environments, the kind of Black on Black crime that you're talking about, Jabari. In a lot of other neighborhoods, we don't see it. And one of the biggest differences that I think exists in these communities is the extent to which folks have the resources that they need to be able to succeed, if not thrive, recognizing there's some real, limitations, right, around the extent to which one can talk about thriving within the larger Black community. The differences in levels of education, of opportunity, basically. Mm-hmm. And there is no doubt in my mind that when I think about what it is that our Black communities in the United States and frankly around the world have experienced and continue to experience as a result of the legacy of racism, coupled with what the outcomes of that racism means in terms of their ability to be able to advance educationally, to advance professionally, to be able to have some level of relative financial security. That mix leads to an incredibly toxic environment the more you take away those resources from people. What you don't see, I think by and large, at least as I've traveled up and down, in the country, obviously not these days, is a lack of willingness to try, to figure out what can I do to make it. And they will define making it based on what they have and based on what they see, for sure. But it certainly is, this whole, they just want to sit down and, just receive and, not try. It's like, yeah, that's a function of how you define try. It really depends on what you define as effort and what you define as success. And unfortunately, I think that mix is what we're seeing. And so, I fully agree with Ryan. And I don't think that we can ignore the importance of making sure that individuals and communities, individuals within, communities, get a much stronger, I'll call it, I don't even want to call it level playing field, but really are brought up and valued as people, valued for their opportunity to survive and, quite frankly, to thrive and to contribute to our country. Until we get to a place where we're willing to do that and can really do it, I think we might see some successes, but we're really not going to see the kind of transformation that we really need to be having.
Thank you for those points, Bern.
I just, as someone who came to this country in 1998, and I lived first in New York and then moved to Tampa, Florida, and I'm married to someone from Mississippi. So I got to see also the reality of Mississippi, and now I'm in Texas. So I agree. This is what has been said already. This is not a easy thing. There certainly is this trauma that Ryan spoke about. I think it's very, very clear, very, very present. The lack of resources is very, very present. The idea of valuing is also very, very important. I think, this is actually how I got started in anti-racism work. It was in Colombia when I lived in a place that was the Pacific coast of Colombia is entirely Black territory with a few indigenous people further up the rivers. And that was really what when I went there and I started, I was a kid, but I was taking photos and people didn't want me to take photos, and I encountered this idea that they thought of themselves as ugly and as not able to do things. So this sort of internalization, that kind of really got me started on thinking about this. So I think this is all very important. And but I also think at the same time, given and knowing and still learning about the history of, even in this country, African-American history. I just recently read a book by Blackmon called Slavery by Another Name, documenting, it's a really enlightening book to me, documenting how slavery continued under forced labor schemes in the South up until the 50s. Considering all of that, I think there's also a tremendous resilience. And there's a people who have achieved so much under the circumstances. It's tremendous, and it's astonishing to me that in a system that does not value you, that doesn't give you chances, that denigrates you, that puts you in a disadvantaged starting position, and still there's people who succeed, who excel, who have produced so much beauty. So to me, that's also something very interesting to see and to witness, again, as someone who is still learning about all of this.
Great insights. Thank you all for responding to that question. I'd like to build upon your responses. Certainly, we talked about the challenges, but on the Global Agenda website, we address the need, and Marjorie, what you mentioned about not only surviving, but thriving. And certainly thriving as a community requires that we tap into our collective power as a people. So on the Global Agenda website, we address the need to economically withdraw from companies and brands who use child slaves or forced labor to produce their products. What global impact do each of you or any of you think that this could have on the position of Black people and disadvantaged communities of color throughout the world if we did use our collective power, particularly economically?
So I think there's no doubt that we could really push for the kind of change you are talking about, Jabari.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there's something else that my two colleagues have mentioned, that you've mentioned as well, that this would really demonstrate. And I think we're getting there. We're not there, but we're getting there. It is to recognize what our collective power really is. You know, when we talk about you're shortchanging yourself, right? Dr. Ryder was, talking about, the devaluation piece. That's a function of what's also known as internalized racism. That's real. It is really real. And the thing with internalized racism is that it affects not just the individual, but it also affects their relationship with others, including their relationship with their own people. There is, I believe, still an unwillingness, or I won't just say a lack of vision or lack of acceptance, but an unwillingness, I think, to really think big about what it is that we can do within the United States, within the continent of Africa, in the Caribbean, in European countries, wherever we are, within our spaces, right? Let alone if we really, truly came together and said, you know what? We're done with the narrative. We are ready for change. We recognize that we need to stop falling for what it is that we've been hearing, falling for the crabs in the barrel syndrome, and really push for the kinds of transformation that you're talking about in terms of how children are being treated, how women are being treated, how Black men are treated, how our elders potentially are because it really depends on where they are, right? Within our culture, clearly they're very valued. Take them in a different context, it's a whole different story. Regardless of sexual orientation, literally, if we full on came together, I think that it would be extraordinary, not just for what we could do for the world, but what we could actually do for ourselves. And yes, we can do it with allies. There's no doubt, there's no doubt about it. But we've got to get to a place where we really come together. And yeah, there's no doubt in my mind that what you're talking about would be nothing short of extraordinary. And there'd be a lot of people who'd be scared, and in my best English, forgive me, they'd be pissed. But you know what? Oh well.
You're always going to piss people off when you're doing revolutionary things, right? Changing the status quo. Bern, do you have anything that you'd like to share? I have a question for Ryan that I'd like to ask him on this topic.
Sure. You ask about, if but the collective power is particularly economically and
from a global standpoint as well.
From a global standpoint. So I spent, as I said earlier, I spent the last years thinking about solutions, because somehow after studying race and racism and democracy and nationalism, all of that stuff, you come to a point where you understand, okay, this is what's going on, but what's the way out? And I do think this is an interesting time right now. I think there has never been an awareness as great right now. There's a political momentum. I mean, there is a House Bill HR 40 that has been proposed and is not being pushed forward, but there is California just passed a law to say that they're going to create a group to examine the possibilities of reparations. We have several examples: Seattle, in North Carolina, Ashley, I believe, There's interesting things going on around the topic of reparations that have not found an open ear for many years. So and that is certainly, you know, interesting, and I think that's something that people need to hone in on and need to kind of support, need to be behind. And similar discussions are going on in Brazil. In Brazil, there was a long struggle away from, you know, what our first speaker, Clarence Davis, said, you know, away from racial democracy towards now we have a quota system in Brazil. There's a system that reserves 30% of places for in universities for either African descendants or people who come from the public school system, which in most cases is pretty much the same. We have similar legislation in Colombia. So that there is all over Latin America, there's a reckoning with its past and an understanding that something needs to be done because the disparities are just too obvious. The United States, where like the wealth of Black households is about 10% of the wealth of white households. So this is the same everywhere, and at this point, this becomes an embarrassment for some countries enough to then at least enact some laws, and normally they are just laws and they sit there. But if people seize those and press and push, I think this is a strategic moment. I think we have never been so close to, for example, really push for reparations.
No, great points, and conversations that I've had throughout this year with friends from across the world who aren't in the Americas particularly have been really interesting because, for example, friends in Europe, when they began to protest for Black Lives Matter, many, for example, a good friend of mine in France, many of his white colleagues questioned as to why Black French people would feel the need to protest because everything in France is fine. Those issues don't exist in France.
Right.
And of course, his response was, "Are you blind? These issues exist on a daily basis."
Right. Yeah.
So I agree with you. This year has definitely pulled the veil back further than we've ever seen it be pulled, not only in America but across the world.
Yeah, France particularly. France has an association of Black organizations called CRIC, which is the Conseil, like a council of Black organizations in France, and they are still doing pioneering work because in France they don't even allow, you know, there's no census data on performance of unemployment or health or anything that is divided by kind of split open by ethnicity, for example, or background or national background. So you don't really know officially what goes on, but we do know because it doesn't take long. You need to be in Paris for 10 minutes, you know, what's going on and how, you know, their suspicion is that unemployment rate among Black French people is about 30%. That's what people like, you know, these researchers found. So yeah, this is, and even in Germany, you know, there is a movement of Black Germans now, and they are, of course, always being asked where you're from, because the mere fact that there's the possibility of a diverse German citizen body that's still foreign to you know, to the way Germany has defined its nationalism. So these struggles are happening everywhere, and the consciousness is being pushed forward everywhere, definitely.
Mm-hmm. Ryan, I'm curious to hear your perspective on this. You're our youngest panelist, and in Nigeria, youth are leading the fight for change. So what do you feel younger generations need specifically to continue to protest, advocate, and stay engaged with this fight? Because as we know, it can be debilitating.
That is a really great question, Jabari. Organization, I think, is key to any movement, any sort of effort that you're making. Organization has to be key. And I was talking to a friend about this a couple weeks ago. You know, the movement is comprised of so many different people and so many different skill sets, and everybody brings something different to the table, right? So I might not want to be in the streets protesting, but I may have a degree in engineering, or I may be a tech person who can sit behind a computer screen and put together all of the clips that that are going on throughout the day. And that's just an example, but I think organization is key. We really have to identify the roles that we all can fit in, right? Everything is not for everybody. But I think coming together and really being strategic, which has happened consistently throughout the summer. We've seen it, especially here in Washington, D.C. You have groups of people, especially at Howard University, groups of people who come together and they organize. They say, okay, what is your skill set? You are good with graphics and logos. Okay, how about you create a flyer? Okay, we have this group who's really adamant about being out in the street and spreading the message. And so I think just really taking the time to organize, because we see dips in the movement, right? We'll see a surge at some point as a response of something that's going on in our community, and then it kind of falls off, right? But if we have consistent organization between different groups of young, not just African Americans and our allies across the country, I think that would be pivotal in keeping the movement going and developing it as we move forward with time.
Nice. I certainly agree. So what do you think is, what is the biggest challenge that is impeding that consistent organization? Because I think we can all see that is the big issue. So what do you think is that missing link that, you know, makes things just more organized and more streamlined?
It's that's a really difficult question, actually. I was watching an interview with Tamika Mallory, who is an organizer with the National Action Network, and she talked about how it's just very difficult to, especially when working with other African Americans, very difficult to come together and organize. And I'm not sure if that's just because it is something that's not taught, or if there's just a disconnect in terms of visions of different people in our community and who really has the most support. That's a really difficult question, Jabbar.
I didn't mean to put you on the spot, and certainly if we, you know, had the answers, we'd be doing work, you know, aligned with whatever that solution was. So no, I was just really curious to get your perspective, and this is a wonderful conversation. I want to discuss, Marjorie, you mentioned something that I think is important to address. Historically, the struggles and realities for Black women are oftentimes overlooked. And as we know, Black women carry our community on their back. You know, even in terms of voting, Black women tend to be the most consistent as well as the most educated voting bloc. So, and then for you, Bernd, in Brazil, Black women constitute a massive army of workers, yet they're underpaid and many times treated as modern day slaves. How do we change the realities for Black women? And just to add another layer to that, we know that about over 300,000 women die around the world as a complication, as a result of complications aligned with giving birth. Why is this the case? Why is it that women suffer substantially more than men? Not only, you know, from a racial perspective, but, you know, gender equity is so misaligned.
Do you want to go first, Dr. Ryder? I promise it's not a trick. It's not a trick question. I promise you, it's not.
Okay. So, you know, the one thing that I know from doing social work in Colombia as well as in Brazil is that, of course, women in their communities are the ones that you can work with and the ones that you will work with because they're the ones who are there. That's also, you know, I did some research in Ghana on microfinance. That's also the ones that you work with because the man, this is a whole different situation. Men not staying in the communities, being more mobile, leaving, migrating. So women are certainly the ones who carry this forward, and of course it's you know, it's sad and it's a shame to see, and particularly, you know, this dying giving birth. This is something that I became aware of not too long ago in the US. Also, there's interesting research on that, and we know that this is this is caused by prejudice. I mean, this is caused by certain expectations, certain ways how Black women are looked upon, how they are treated, how they're. I remember being at a conference with by a colleague of mine who's Haitian. She said she's tired of being resilient. She's tired of being looked upon as the strong Black woman who can take whatever, and that sort of expectation, I think, that contributes. So it's a real shame. It's a really difficult topic here that it pushes Black women into this positionality. Now, going back to what Ryan said earlier, the divisions, of course, it's hard to find unity in a system like the US where everything is based on individual achievement, where, if you're able to, get ahead just a little bit, you have a reason, a rational incentive to leave everybody else behind. That's how the whole system is set up. So that's a problem, and it works against unity. The one thing that I think that someone like me as a researcher, as a scholar can contribute to this is to say we also need new visions, new utopias. I think we're kind of at a place where people protest and march, and I've been to some social forums, but we know what we're against. We're not quite sure what we're for, because with the end of socialism, that kind of vision is is off the table, and there's not a lot of. So, what kind of world are we envisioning? What sort of system could this be? And I think that's an important work. And again, here I think it's so important to do this kind of historical research that our first speaker was mentioning. There's so many insightful, innovative solutions coming out of Latin America and Africa in terms of community organizing, community building, lending systems. There's so much going on. There's such a richness of it, but it's ignored. It's not something that we value. So yeah, I guess these are different thoughts just thrown in here.
No, great points. Great points and great questions. What are we for? I think that's some food for thought for me personally, because I think it's easy to say, I'm against whatever politician you're against, but what do you stand for? And
it's difficult. There was a panel that I attempted once, and the headline was "What's left?" Mm-hmm. And it's an interesting question, because we know what the right wing stands for. At this point, it's not so clear. How historically even the left has developed, or what opposition is, and what the new vision could be.
Thank you, Marjorie.
So I fully agree with what Doc said. If we step back for a minute and we think about the role that Black women have played in this country since the beginning of the presence of Black people in this country, moving right up till today. What we've always done is to be advocates, protectors, supporters, and expected hench people. That's become very much part of our DNA. I dare say that reality is also very similar to what Black women experience all around the world. And as Dr. Ryder said, and Ryan certainly said it as well, those expectations absolutely mean that when struggle happens, you are there to make things happen, right? To ensure that in the end there is survival, to help make change happen. What you don't necessarily get is high visibility, appreciation, and a dual layer of disrespect. So you're disrespected or undervalued as a Black person and undervalued as a woman. And you can be appreciated for your womanhood in certain ways, but the extent to which those ways ultimately really are beneficial for you, not so much. And if we think about the civil rights movement, the extent to which Black women played an incredibly pivotal role in much of the successes. We know about the stories. We know about Harriet Tubman, very, very, critical figure, obviously. We know about Rosa Parks. There are a lot of other women whose stories we don't know as much about, and the significance of their role we don't know as much about. The fact that we're in a different world now, where we've got people like Tamika Mallory, who's amazing. We have leaders within government, like the Congressional Black Caucus, right? We have Karen Bass. The list goes on and on. And we know who these women are. We know what they've done for a really long time. And we've got some social leaders as well. We have even first ladies like Michelle Obama, right, who really helped to break the traditional mold. Let's be clear that there's been a whole lot of slamming for having done that, right? There's a nonstop pushback that continues to permeate. And when we think about Kamala Harris, and we think about what it is that she has achieved, just de facto, and then what she's done now at this point in time, and in the face of it all, continues to push forward because of the bigger vision, because of the bigger sense of mission, right, is quite frankly extraordinary. And the debt of gratitude that we should have, hopefully in time, we will have it. But what does that mean then for your psyche? What does it mean? What toll does it take on you, on a personal level, to have that level of expectation, that level of pressure, that level of ultimately not really putting yourself, not putting yourself first, in a lot of ways, not even necessarily considering yourself intrinsically, right? But really defining yourself through the eyes of others. And the others could be any of a number of people. For me, it would be really, really interesting. And it's something that I actually really want to start looking into. Dr. Reiter, perhaps you know more about this, the extent to which there has been effort, to the extent that there's been growing effort to measure the impact of racism, structural, interpersonal, internalized racism on people's health, right? What are the differentials by gender? And what are the differences, potentially depending on where, especially for Black people, and depending on where they are in the country, what are the differences by color, right? So we talked about racism. Colorism is also the other piece of this conversation. What is the toll that it really takes? And ultimately, when we look at the reality that Black women experience with pregnancy, with delivery and post-delivery, right? It shouldn't come as a surprise. To say that it's tragic, to say that it's criminal, really, is an understatement, because what it really demonstrates once again is the extent to which we have a massive problem in our country and arguably around the world when it comes to both race and gender evaluation. Period. That's the canary in the coal mine. And again, it's going to take a while to make those changes, to be able to to see some real change. But that's something that's got to change throughout the entire lifespan. It's got to change even with discussions, if you will, experiences within the medical system in and of itself. I've got a story that I could share that would have you like, are you kidding me? It wasn't a question of lack of resources, but what should have been a standard procedure almost cost me my life. And there's no doubt in my mind that was a function of negligence. That was not because of a lack of communication. It was because of a total disregard.
I'm sorry that you had that experience, and I'm sure that if you were to share the details of it with us, it would make us angry.
Yep.
They're angry. And there's so much to unpack and still discuss with you all. Unfortunately, because of time, I have to wrap up this panel, but I do want to give each of you an opportunity to share 1 minute of closing remarks, because I think that there's so much more that I know you all have to share. And I'd like to start with Ryan, because he is currently running for office, and I want to wish you the best with your campaign. This is amazing and exciting. Hopefully we have several Bison who are victorious in the next few weeks. But if you could share 1 minute or less your final points before we wrap up this panel and move into our next.
Certainly. Again, thank you, Jabari, and thank you, Jeanette, for having me. Really enjoyed discussing all of these issues with you guys. My name is Ryan Washington. I'm a native Washingtonian. Grew up in Anacostia, graduate of Howard. Really for my campaign, we're focusing on 2 major issues in the ward, and that is increasing mental health resources for students and closing the digital divide. I am a firm believer that technology has the power to change lives, especially in the present day right now. We're in something called the 4th Industrial Revolution, which means we are slowly but surely inching towards a society that is technology based. And so when you talk about students who experience high levels of trauma, students who don't have housing stability, students who experience a plethora of issues and solutions to these issues, technology, in my opinion, can be one. Coding and STEM, aviation, engineering related fields, all of these things are opportunities for students to not only change the trajectory of their lives, but also at the same time develop a skill set, be able to hopefully break a cycle of poverty and come back to your community and contribute in some way. And again, thank you, Jabari. Thank you, Jeanette, Dr. Innocent, Dr. Ryder. It was great having this discussion with you.
Thank you, Ryan, and all the best. We're so excited for you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Marjorie, I'll have you close us out. I'd like to go to Dr. Ryder first.
All right. So thank you again for this opportunity. It has been a pleasure to meet all of you, even if it's in my own living room, but still. I would say this is what I said earlier. I want to close with this. This is a time of opportunity. California just passed a law for reparations. I think reparations has to come with atonement, has to come with recognition, has to come with a rewriting of history. I don't know if you have been in Germany, Jabari, but in Germany there's an interesting project, that's how I want to close, which was an initiative from a individual artist who created little stones in front of houses where Jewish people had lived and were then killed to remember them. They called Stolpersteine, stepping stones, because they stick out a little bit and you end up stumbling stones. You end up stumbling over them, and they contain information of who lived there, for how long, and what happened to that person. And most of them ended up in concentration camps. I think it's time for this country to reckon with its own past, with the history of slavery. I can't understand how there's no more museums where we can see what this meant and what this did to this country and what it did to the people. And I think that's the time right now to push for this, to rewrite history, to recognize this past and to face it, not to deny it, to face it. So I think there is opportunity here.
There's opportunity. Great way to close. Thank you so much. We really appreciate all that you shared during this panel. Valuable insights. Thank you. And Dr. Innocent, last but not least.
So thank you so much, Jabari, and all the organizers, all the attendees. I'll leave you with what was actually going to be my main point. You've heard it pretty much this evening, and I'll just be more explicit about it. Vote, VOTE. All right. It matters for our future because elections have consequences. They can be in your favor or they could not. There's a portion of it that's not up to you. There's a portion of it that is. And it is really important for us to become more active voters, regular voters, to become informed voters, and then to be part of the process of making laws, making decisions, creating budgets throughout, right? So not just every year or every 4 years, even worse, right? But literally to be actively part of what gets shaped for communities. And the more we are part of that process, the harder we are to ignore. And the more active we are, the more what happens, what gets shaped, can actually be in our favor. I think what Ryan is doing is incredibly important. We should be part of the process also by deciding to run for office. There are any of a number of offices that we could run for. It makes a difference. And so literally, in terms of making sure that your civic engagement and your efforts to help encourage others in your circles to do the same can in and of itself be incredibly transformative. It is absolutely necessary. And the kinds of changes that we want to see at this point in time will not happen if we're on the sidelines. So I encourage you, please, please be part of, literally be part of the process. This is really what the sausage making of democracy is about. And, you know, as my colleagues have said, definitely become more involved in making change happen in your community. You know, beyond that, there are ways large and small that you can make a difference. So take a look, because it's like real talk, it's our time. It's our time.
It's our time. Thank you. Great way to close out this panel. Thank you so much, Dr. Innocent, Dr. Ryder, and Ryan Washington, DC Ward 8 Board of Education candidate. Vote for Ryan if you are in DC and are in Ward 8. Take Dr. Innocent's advice to be engaged and to vote very seriously. And as Dr. Ryder said, there is opportunity in this moment, so let's not let it pass us by. On that note, thank you all for participating. I really wish the conversation could have continued longer, because I really appreciated each of your perspectives on the myriad of issues that we discussed. Now we will move into our next panel, which is going to be on financial intelligence. I'd like to introduce 3 panelists. The first is Jacqueline Bowles. She is the Senior Vice President of Retail Banking at Industrial Bank. Jacqueline Bowles earned her BS in Business Administration from Bowie State in 1994, soon after she joined Bank of America, where she successfully managed over 5 branch locations throughout PG County, Maryland. During her distinguished tenure, Jacqueline made many contributions and earned numerous accolades, including the Community Investment President's Award for her dedication to volunteering in underserved communities. She received the Diversity Award for her efforts to enhance the company's vision regarding diversity. And she served as a chief architect behind and founding member of Bank of America's Diversity Council. After several years, Jacqueline joined SunTrust Bank, where she managed the largest deposit-based branch location in Prince George's County and was also recognized as the top investment sales manager in her region. Jacqueline joined Industrial Bank in 2009, where she quickly distinguished herself and was promoted to Senior Vice President of the Retail and Operations Banking divisions. She has a passion for leading teams and serving the community. And with that, Jacqueline continues to focus on innovative ways to enhance the client banking experience through the development of her sales and operations team, and was recently added as a member of Industrial Bank's executive leadership team. I am proud to welcome Jacqueline Bowles to our financial intelligence panel. Our second panelist is Daryl Addison. Daryl Addison is the CEO of TorpedoPot. Daryl Addison has over 30 years of experience in the clinical, pharmaceutical, biotech, medical device, and food and IT industries. In 2003, he received his master's in quality assurance regulatory affairs at Temple University. And in 2010, he received his master's in theology at Liberty University in Lynchburg, Virginia. He's a serial inventor and currently owns TorpedoPot, Cyanide Technologies, and Wafer. He's written 3 books: US and EU Cloud Computing Policy and Acceptance, Laws, Regulations, and Standards Governing Personal, Private, and Confidential Information Stored in Cloud and Computer Systems, and How to Protect Personal, Private, and Regulated Information in cloud systems and personal computers. That is Darrell Addison, the CEO of Torpedo Pot. Excited to welcome him to our panel as well. And last but not least, we have Reverend Marvin Owens of Michigan Park Christian Church. Marvin J. Owens currently serves as the Chief Engagement Officer for Impact Shares. In this role, Marvin has engagement responsibility for both fund managers and corporations. Marvin is also responsible for strategic relationships with our social advocacy partners and leads the firm in broader social impact and advocacy conversations. Prior to joining Impact Shares, Marvin served as Senior Director of Economic Programs for the NAACP. Mr. Owens serves as an advisory board member of the Stonehenge Capital and MTC Fund, where he advises, recommends, and monitors fund investments for economic impact. His guest lecturer credits include Oxford University's Said School of Business on the subjects of responsible leadership and economic development in the Black church. Prior to becoming an independent consultant, Mr. Owens served as Vice President for Economic Empowerment at the National Urban League, where he managed all aspects of National Urban League's corporate, foundation, and government relationships with specific focus on affiliate economic development activities, small business development, and finance. Without further ado, it is my pleasure to welcome Mr. Marvin Owens of Michigan Park Christian Church to the stage as well. Welcome.
Great to be here.
Yes, certainly excited to have you here. We have a bevy of questions for you, so I hope that you're excited to get engaged in this conversation. So, Mr. Marvin Owens, I'm curious to know, what role do you think spirituality plays in coping with the current changes that we are facing? And what role do you think spirituality plays in the economic empowerment of our people?
Yeah, that's a great question. I love that question because it really gives me a chance to kind of tie into the two worlds that I live in every day, which is obviously being a spiritual leader of a congregation here in Washington, D.C., but also serving in the various roles that I've served in terms of economic empowerment and addressing racial inequities around wealth. So I think that the question about how do we cope is important. I think spirituality plays a key role in coping. I've been asked that question not just by my colleagues that I work with every day on the economic issues, but also the folks I work with in the church, which is, how do you guard your spirit when you have all these things happening around you, when you see racial injustice coming at you every single day, when you're kind of having a nonstop diet of news around the issues that we know existed already, but you see it happening every single day. And I always tell people that you have to guard your spirit. You have to manage how much of this you can take in at any given moment. The fight is always going to be there. But you have to guard your spirit to the place where you don't allow yourself to be overwhelmed and inundated with it, because it can be depressing. It can be overwhelming. And then you tie on top of that the COVID pandemic, quarantine, can't go anywhere, can't relate and touch the people that I love and care about. That's all a recipe for some real issues for mental and emotional well-being and illness that can happen in the process. And that's a spiritual issue. That's a spiritual issue that we have to fight. I also know that, and have always believed that that we have to fight what I consider a spirit of poverty, where we don't aspire, we don't expect anything better or greater. We have to change that narrative and give people hope and remind them that things are possible. It's where my biblical background kind of attaches to my economic work, that I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. So that sense of I have, God's given me something that I can use for my well-being and betterment is something that we have to constantly remind people of, that you have something in you that God put in you that enables you to survive this and be able to get over this and get through it. But we have to kind of remind people of that power within to make sure that they're continue to push and and push forward on the issues that they care about. They care about deeply. So, yeah, I love the question because it kind of gives me a chance to tie both those worlds together.
Sure. Well, with that one response, you took us to church already. I didn't know that my spirit needed what you just said, but it's so necessary in challenging times, such as the times that we're facing 2 weeks away from an election that many are calling the most important election of our lifetime, which seemingly that tagline comes around with each election.
Yeah.
So what ways can churches support people and the community through the changes that we are experiencing today? This tense political environment, the pandemic, racial and social injustice. How can the church support?
Yeah, I think it's a couple of ways. I think, well, first of all, the church has been fundamentally impacted in a way that, we never saw coming. Churches are struggling to figure out how to be a church in the middle of a pandemic where you can't gather together. So there's some fundamental economic issues that we're beginning to really have to grapple with, which is, we invest a lot in buildings, as an example. And so when you don't have people aren't gathering in a building anymore, what really then is the value and use of a building when you're not gathering the way we used to? And so I think there are going to be some fundamental questions being asked around, economics. Okay, we're investing so much in buildings. What are we not doing when we do that? And so what the pandemic has really exposed is we need to be refocusing our resources away from maintaining facilities and buildings and the things that we thought we had to do, and now rethinking how we engage in real work and real ministry. So I have colleagues on both sides of the aisle who talk to me about, how we're voting, what we're doing. Churches have to be used as a mechanism to motivate people to get out to vote. We have to get people out to vote. Our church van is used to take people to the polls. Our church van is used to get food to the people who need food. Our church van is being used to get folks to medical appointments and to pick folks up and drop folks off. You have to begin to rethink the use of resources in a way that really benefits people, because we're not gathering in the building like we used to. And so it really is, reshaping, I think, how churches see themselves in terms of how they ought to be engaged. We have to be able to make sure that we are providing people good information. That's one thing that we could really do a better job of, quite frankly, because again, to my earlier point, we are inundated with information all the time. It's important that we have some trusted people that we can look to provide us, can help us sift through some of the stuff that we're hearing. I was talking to a senior the other day, and they were telling me about Joe Biden's emails. And I'm saying to her, what does Joe Biden's emails have to do with the cost of Medicare or your ability to get food that you need, the services that you need? Let's sift through the noise so that we can get to what the real issues are.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I was having this conversation earlier with a colleague regarding just how the internet is such a Decepticon. Yeah. So many people take what they see, not even what they've read, but literally what they see on the internet, and they take it as truth. So you made a great point about the church serving as a conduit, to weed out all of that untrue information and really getting people the true information. But what you said about buildings, are they necessary? I think that immediately made me think of how people have always said church isn't a place. Daryl Addison, we see you. You're here.
You hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, man.
Welcome.
I apologize.
No problem at all. So I was just saying, so I think now more than ever we see that church is not a building. Church can be facilitated totally outside of a roof. And
so now we're thinking about, like my churches, we've been really thinking about, how do we repurpose our building to provide housing? How do we rethink the use of building to provide other kinds of community resources? so that you could actually get use out of a space that's just sitting there right now. And the truth is, if you look back to the 1918 pandemic, from a religious point of view, churches didn't really come back in full force for a couple of years because people were so nervous about whether they would get sick or not. And I think the same thing is going to happen with this pandemic, in the sense that people aren't going to feel comfortable coming back into a building for some time. And therefore, you're going to have to just rethink that investment. Is it really, how do you utilize that investment in a very different way that really impacts a community in a positive way that it's not doing right now, because it's just sitting empty.
Very true. Very true. We are truly amidst a change in the tide.
Absolutely.
That is a fact. Daryl, I certainly have some questions for you. Since you've done business outside of the US, how would you advise others to begin to work internationally? And how do you think that international work contributes to the financial revolution that we so desire within our communities across the world?
I think one of the things that we've been able to do is that we forged a relationship with countries like Brazil. And with that, we were actually able to grow food at an alarming rate. And so what we do is that we empower the citizens of those communities to do exactly that. The activities that we spoke about earlier, about infusing the communities and causing them to grow, all of this takes money, it takes expertise. So what we do is that we provide solutions so that they can now take our products and make money, stabilize their families producing healthy foods, and also have food left over to grow. So we're building another economy within that. We call it the informal economy. That's what we're doing in a lot of countries. But you need to have partnerships to make that happen. Very, very deep partnerships.
Can you repeat what type of economy is it?
We call it the informal economy. The informal economy, yeah. And that's with everyday citizens that go to churches, and everybody wants to trade international. Everyone wants to sell things and buy cheap and sell high. But still within that community, you have some of the resources. Like, for instance, your informal economy may be your hairdressers and your beauty salons. They're even the small storekeepers. And those are the ones that keep that economy going, even though you have all this adversity all around you.
I'm very familiar with the informal economy. My time living in Nairobi, Kenya, truly exposed me to how all of these, mom and pop shops or women who sell vegetables, all of these informal workers are huge contributors to the economies of these countries. And even throughout the pandemic, we've seen that many workers in the informal economy were never granted the privilege of quarantining or working from home because that is not an option for them. So I'm happy that you brought that point to the table. Jacqueline, I would like to ask you about the work that you're doing at Industrial Bank. I'm happy that you're able to join us. Welcome.
Thank you so very much.
You're welcome. Can you tell us a little bit about Industrial Bank, as well as what plans does the bank have to help customers create generational wealth?
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So Industrial Bank is an African-American owned, third generation community bank. We are a community development financial institution. And really what that means is that we are a locally confined bank, and we reinvest 60% of our assets back into the communities that we serve. We do that via financial literacy, financial empowerment, sponsorships, our lending programs, and our ability to create unique products and services that are divinely individuals that we serve in those communities, which for the most part are underserved and unbanked. And so when we speak about generational wealth, my president, B. Doyle Mitchell, and our executive team are really focused, maniacally focused on getting this education out, because it is so critical. And so what we do is we know that we can't be all things to everyone. And so we leverage community partnerships, minority-owned businesses. And so we have a relationship with Amy Griffin from the Griffin Firm, and we provide free seminars several times a year, several different locations. And now this was pre-COVID. We're navigating now through virtual connection, but we would provide free seminars on how to build wealth. whether it's through real estate, life insurance, estate, and then to protect your assets, right? Through the strategic goals of estate planning. And so these are just some of the things that we do as far as the give back to the community. We believe that information is power. We are void oftentimes of a lot of critical information that other cultures leverage in order to create wealth, retain wealth, and transfer wealth from one generation to the other. And so that is something that we incorporate in our day-to-day operations.
Thank you. Thank you for that information. Can anyone bank with Industrial Bank, or is it location specific? For example, I'm based in Chicago. Would I be able to open an account with you all? So
the answer is yes. We accept customers throughout the nation. We actually have 5 branches in Washington, D.C., 2, soon to be 3 in Prince George's County. And if you all are aware, in November of 2019, we were blessed to be able to purchase another failing Black-owned bank, City National Bank. And so now we have 2 locations in Newark, New Jersey, and one just a stone throw away from the historic Apollo Theater on 125th Street in Harlem. And so we have an online portal where individuals throughout the United States can access the portal and open accounts online. But we're a relationship bank. We really, really enjoy it when we're able to meet our customers. But now, because we're doing a lot of things virtual, we are holding virtual meetings just, all the way around. So yes, anybody can bank with us.
Great, great. I'm going to look into it this weekend.
Great.
Yes. And on that note of financing, Daryl, as an inventor, how did you get your financing and obtain true ownership of your products?
I don't want to use this as the golden rule because everybody has a different stream of income and different levels and financing coming in. But I think you have to be ingenious about your financing. For us, we use multiple, we went out in multiple directions. One is that we didn't literally raise money. We defined a good product and we brought it to the table and we told the community, can you use this or not? Will this make your life better? Can you grow more food? Can you grow food with no human intervention? And can you grow lots of it? And our community came back and said, hey, listen, I put seeds in your flower pot, Mr. Addison, and I grew over 300 to 500 peppers with no human intervention, and I did it all in 2 square feet. So the financing for us comes in recognizing that we have good products and services that will meet the needs of our community. That is our number one, and I'm sure we can see from the banking industry, that is the number one thing that we have to share with our community, that our products and services are outstanding and they're better than anybody else, they're competitive, and we can win. And so we use that. But most of it has been done with internal company financing. But for the most of it, once the idea took off, then we get to rely on the community, and they will grow us, and they have been growing us.
Great. Does anyone have anything they'd like to add or comment around what Daryl said? Jacqueline, I saw you.
Just that the what Daryl said was powerful. I think it's important to engage the community in what you're doing. In addition to that, though, I think it's important to recognize that that typically our community has not had access to the kind of startup financing that other communities have. Mm-hmm. And so it's great that we have Industrial Bank on this panel because our Black banks are typically under-resourced and underutilized in our communities, quite honestly. But I think that having access to that startup money is always a challenge for anybody who's trying to start a business, but also for our communities, even more of a challenge because we typically have a lot less wealth to access to be able to start that process. So, for years we talked about home ownership as the key to kind of beginning the process of building wealth, and I still believe that. But the fact of the matter is home ownership rates for Black folks has gone down. The trend has been down. It's going back up now a little bit now, but the trend has been going down in terms of our own percentage of home ownership. And that has been the typical resource or source for the kind of working capital we need to be able to start a business. And then, you gotta have your family and your kinfolk and all your buddies and your grandma and everybody to, you know, believe in you. And often we tap them for help, you know, help me out, help me get started. And that's the kind of thing we had to kind of bootstrap our way into this process of entrepreneurship. That has been our experience. Unlike other communities where they have access to the traditional forms of startup financing that we typically don't.
Oh, great points. And on that note, this is a question for all of you to respond to if you care to do so. What political changes, as we, anxiously approach election day, what political changes do you think will help us build toward a better economic future? What needs to be implemented for there to be more resources available for us to be financially secure?
I think there's two things that we're focusing on. And one is that we realize that the state, the federal, the city governments are behind these community gardens. But yet, people who are growing in these community gardens are growing probably in a lot of toxic environments. So we want to pass legislation to get the city and get the state out of that business so that we can provide solutions so people can grow their own food. The second thing we're focusing on is that we realize that the whole concept of farming is really designed to provide resources to rural America. You can actually have farming in the city and you will not be subsidized as you would be in the suburbs. So we need, and we're pushing for legislation to allow our inner city growers to develop their own businesses, where that we would give them all the supplies and then they could create their own enterprise and they can be subsidized just like the rural farmers throughout the places in America.
That's interesting. So you're saying that the ground, the soil that a lot of community gardens grow their food in is toxic, contaminated soil?
Well, you can't say that it's toxic, but what you can say is that most of those communities have been developed on top of other communities.
Yes.
And so therefore, you're not allowing people to come in and do the right testing in that soil to show you that, make you feel confident that what you're growing is really healthy and is not doing the otherwise. And so we want the city to be able to use our containerized systems, since it is the fastest growing food system in the world right now, and we own the technology behind it. We believe that in the hands of African Americans and those inner city individuals, I don't care what color you are, but those individuals can develop their own stream of income, passing very simple laws. That's all.
And this is Torpedo Pot that you're speaking of, correct?
This is Torpedo Pot. That is correct.
Okay, everyone check it out, www.torpedopot.com. Torpedo.
I feel better now. Thank you for clearing that up.
Yeah.
Checking it out. Looking forward to taking a quick
Yes.
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
No, that's wonderful. And certainly that's something that I oftentimes, I know that if you're often not in the agricultural or farming world, you can be so ignorant to those issues. So certainly thank you for, bringing that to my
But also there's an added benefit now as people are really trying to become, looking at what we're eating and where it comes from. And there's so many more people. My wife is vegan. A number of my family members have decided to go without meat and have a vegetarian diet. Then you have to begin to wonder where you're getting the food from. Where is it grown? What kind of process did your food go through? So the idea of being able to have a process that's controlled by you. We can grow your own food, I think is game changing. So I'm looking forward to learning more about Torpedo Pot.
It's not only a game changer, and I'm thank you for raising that up because we get that a lot. It is a game changer. But remember now, we're experiencing a Carver moment right now. We're ushering in a brand new technology that nobody's ever seen before, and the results have been stunning. So stunning to so much that we can now open up growing centers in the city of Philadelphia and all the major cities to create entrepreneurs within those cities. It's so stunning. This is how it works. People always ask me, Darryl, how do you do this? Well, ask yourself this question. Can anybody stop you from growing? Can anybody literally put their hands on you and stop you from growing? And the answer is no. So the question is, why are we trying to grow plants? If growth is natural, then why are we trying to grow plants? So what we do is that we use in the soil, remember now, that soil, when that plant comes out of that soil, you have one organism being converted to another organism. The problem is that nobody understands those organisms that are converting it. What we do is that we understand it and we feed them. And that's why we can open up an inner city location and we can grow over 1 million pounds of peppers in a short period of time, because we feel precision growing and we empower our clients to develop.
Remember the guy was cutting my grass. We were talking about doing some things in our backyard and doing some landscaping. We're talking about growing some flowers, and I think he was from Jamaica, and he was like, "Man, you cannot eat flowers." Why are you growing flowers? You can't eat flowers. And ever since then, I've been like, I'm like, you know what?
You gave up on flowers.
Can I just say one more thing? And I think you'll find it very interesting. I want us to just take a breather and just lay back for a little while and think about what I'm about to say, because I think you'll find it very interesting. Do you realize that you are using the same tools to grow your food that the Egyptians did? Think about how crazy that is. We have now cars that drive by themselves. We have systems that you can plant chips and track people all over the world. But are you telling me every time I think of my garden, I got to go out with a shovel, spade? That is done. It's over. Nobody has to do that ever again.
Well, on that note, and thank you for sharing so much information about your product, because I think it speaks to entrepreneurship and many people leaning into entrepreneurship as a source of economic sustainability and independence. So, Jacqueline, for entrepreneurs, what types of loans or assistance does Industrial Bank provide for someone who has an invention as great as Darryl's and just does not know where to go for the financing?
Yeah, so entrepreneurship, especially in the beginning stages, those first 2 years, is a little tough for normal banks to be able to fund. And so typically we don't do startup lendings, and the startup means that you're in there for the first 2 years. And so because of regulation and risk, that's a really a scary place for most banks. And so what we do again is we have community partners, Capital Area Asset Builders, Operation Hope. We're actually getting ready to partner with another organization that is able to provide affordable lending, access to capital for businesses that have to be in business at least for 6 months. And so that is a monumental step for us. It allows us to reach an audience that we typically have not been able to reach, and under the relationship of Industrial Bank, and provide them access to capital. However, on the deposit side, we offer a relationship called Emerging Business. And that is where businesses 5 years or younger bank with us 1 full year free of charge. They don't have to worry about minimum balances. They don't have to worry about monthly maintenance fees. We realize that this is a critical moment where they're getting everything in order, generating some revenue, and the last thing that we want them to be worried about are service fees. What we do encourage, though, is the beginning of a relationship. And so each of those businesses that sign up for that type of relationship, we encourage them to meet with their branch manager at least once quarterly, so that we can review your bank statements, find out what your strategic goals are for the upcoming year or the next year and a half, so that when it comes time for us to engage in loan conversations, we are familiar with with the business, how they're running, what their challenges are, how they're going to overcome those challenges. And again, the good thing about community banking, Industrial Bank or any other minority community bank, is that our lending decisions are local. And so while we are heavily regulated, our president, our executives sit around table and they make local lending decisions. They pull the business owners in. They say, these numbers or these ratios are askew a little bit. Talk to us about it. What happened? What is your plan? And I will tell you, I'm so proud to work for an organization that oftentimes is able to say yes when the other banks would just say no because the mathematics didn't add up. And so those are some of the things that we do. We leverage partnerships, we provide free banking, and we build relationships from day one.
No, that's great insight. And on that note, I'm just curious to know. So if someone were, choosing between Chase Bank or any of these big banks, what is the advantage for a person of color to bank with a minority-owned institution?
So I started out with, we are a community development financial institution. And so nowadays, people really want to know, what are you doing for my community? And like I said, we reinvest 60% of our assets on an annual basis, and we've been doing that since 1934. If you know, the reason that we are even here, the essence of Industrial Bank is that we were built because the banks, those major banks, would allow minorities to make deposits every day, all day. But when it came time for us to qualify for loans, to create generational wealth, to elevate our standards of living, we were met with closed doors. So this is how we operate. This is the essence of who we are, reaching out into our community, reaching out to those that struggle, reaching out to those that are unbanked and underbanked, and starting new business ventures in order to help our community thrive. So all that I would say is, a lot of times we see our community show up after they've been declined by some of the larger banks that we are all too familiar with. Let us not be your last resort. Black ice is just as cold as white ice. Come on into Industrial Bank in the beginning. Let's sit down, let's have a conversation, and let's create that financial strategic roadmap together.
I love that. I love that. I think that is a great call to action for attendees and those who will listen to this panel and this event in its entirety once it's live, it's recorded and shared on the internet. Marvin, Reverend Owens, do you have anything to say aligned with what she shared? What has been your experience with banking and even in terms of the work that you've done? What perspectives have you?
I think, I go back to a point I made earlier, is that our minority depository institutions have been suffering for a long time. And, I think it's important that we can turn around and find ways to do business with our own institutions. I think it's important that we make that a priority. One of the things that we worked on a lot at the NAACP is, why is it that we aren't investing more resources and time, and how do we support Black depository institutions like Industrial Bank and others? So we have to do that, and our community has to do that. We can't ask anyone else to do that for us. I mean, it's not like we don't have resources. I mean, the truth of the matter is we're banking with somebody. We're doing something with a debit card in some place. It's important that we identify our institutions and say, okay, let's make a decision that we're going to support our institutions and be intentional about it. And I would challenge, as a pastor of church in Washington, D.C., I would sit with colleagues all the time and say, why aren't we all doing business with an industrial bank? And we got every Sunday we're making deposits someplace. And why aren't we being intentional about really supporting our own institutions? That's a challenge we've got to have for ourselves.
What is stopping us from being intentional? Because certainly there's always, especially in the aftermath of, a highly publicized issue that impacts, our community. There's always this discussion around us needing to, support Black businesses, only buy Black, bank with Black institutions, but that never seems to be there never seems to be sustained energy around that. So this question is for each of you: what is it that we need to do to further empower our people from a financially intellectual perspective?
Well, I'm going to say this. I think, for one thing, we have got to stop holding our businesses to a higher standard than we hold other businesses. Let me say this, because what I see all the time is that we will put up with all kinds of stuff from other businesses, and yet when it happens in a Black business, I'm not going back there no more. See, that's why I don't want to support our people. Wait a minute, you'll put up with that same stuff in another business. And yet when you go to a black business owner and something bad happens, you want to blow up and go, I'm never going back. That's crazy. So we've got to stop holding ourselves to a higher standard than we would hold somebody else. And in fact, I think if we're going to be intentional about it, we got to show our businesses some grace. We got to work with them. And if there's not a good experience that you have, talk to them about it. Help them out. Let them know. Give them feedback. Don't just blow it off as if we can't do business with you anymore because you had a bad experience. No, we have to change that narrative if we're going to change what's happening in our country and what's happening to our own business owners. That's one thing I would add. I would just throw that out there. I was just simply raising the questions around making sure that we are doing what we can to support our own businesses, and just deciding that it's going to be intentional. It's just we're going to work with them. And if it's something that we have a bad experience with, we need to let them know, and say, hey, this is an area here we got to improve on. But don't just blow them off as if you will never go back to a black business because of a bad experience. That's just not the way we treat other businesses, quite frankly. And I think we're just harder on each other often than we are on the folks outside of our community.
Sadly. Certainly we want the best. I think we expect, absolutely, we want our people to succeed and thrive. But oftentimes we are overtly critical, and it's damaging to us collectively. Yeah. Daryl, did you have any points to add? I'd like to, at this point, get you all to start sharing your final talking points as we'll be preparing to wrap up the panel in the next few minutes.
So I think, I guess to wrap it up would be, there is opportunity out there, but you have to see it when it comes knocking. Water may run downhill for a lot of people, but you've got to take a look at that environment and find out how you can excel. With Torpedo Pod, we found that our place is converting poverty into sustainability. So we realized that malnutrition children, deficient foods, don't have to be, and we can make that change and make that difference. And that's what we're doing. So Torpedo Pod is partnering with the community in order to give the community opportunities to grow and develop, not giving it to a corporate structure, but allowing people to open up their own businesses in the inner cities and in rural America, which we do high agribusiness, as well as in-home growing and things like that. But so we're very hopeful, and we believe that the opportunities are there. To answer the thing, I think Marvin touched on, I think we should, yes, I think there should be a higher standard for all of us. I think service is the highest calling you can make to anybody. Being able to service someone is a tremendous opportunity. And if they see your services and identify your services as being superior, they're going to gravitate to that. And that's what we believe in Torpedo Pod.
Thank you. Thank you, Daryl. And congratulations on all the success with Torpedo Pod.
Thank you very much. We thank all of us because we're all a community together.
For sure. Thank you.
Yep. Oh, just closing, just want to say thank you for the opportunity to kind of be a part of the conversation. I think it's really, really critical that we have more of these discussions. I think it's important that we have more forums, more opportunities to talk about what's happening and to really think through the solutions. One of the things I think is so critical right now is that we don't continue to look at these old paradigms in terms of a top-down, somebody's going to come in and be our leader and going to tell us what needs to happen and kind of lead the charge to the deliverance and the restoration of our. No, that's not going to happen. The answers are coming from the ground up. The answers are coming from gatherings like this where people are really thinking through and sharing and engaging and sometimes disagreeing and kind of coming up with the solutions. I think that's going to be the key to seeing some of the change we want to see in our communities. It's going to be sort of a ground up swell of information and ideas that are going to move us. That's why I'm so happy about these movements for civil rights and social justice that are not led by some one person, but it's a movement of people who are saying we need to change that. We need to do something different here. That's going to be the model, I think, or is the model for future change and on economic issues as well.
Great. I couldn't agree with you more. And I'm so thankful for your contributions to this panel. Thank you so much, Reverend Owens.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Once again, I'd like to extend a heartfelt thanks to all of our panelists this evening. Certainly our panelists who just wrapped up, Jacqueline Bowles, Daryl Addison, and Reverend Owens. They contributed great insights to tonight's event. Thank you all so much for this great dialogue. I believe we discussed many solutions and ways forward to add to the global agenda as we unite toward making a positive impact on our global societies. And we thank you all who tuned in from around the world. I'm so excited that this is a global conversation because I've always felt that the fight for equality within communities of Black people and communities of color was not just something that was exclusive to the United States. So I'm extremely grateful that this is a global conversation. The Global Transcendence team has been taking notes throughout the event, and they will be adding the action steps presented this evening to the global agenda, which is outlined on our website, www.gtglobalagenda.com. Also, we have an exciting challenge. Visit the website to learn more about the Global Transcendence #WeHavePower social media contest and enter for a chance to win $1,000 in savings at Industrial Bank. Again, visit gtglobalagenda.com to learn more and save the date for the Global Agenda Summit Part 2 and 3 on November 18th and 19th. It's been wonderful serving as your MC for the evening, a true honor and pleasure. And I'd like to close us out by introducing the founder of Global Transcendence, Mr. William Patterson. Thank you all so much and have a great evening. And now Mr. Patterson has joined us. I'm happy to hand the floor over to you, sir.
Thank you so much. This has been an exciting night. And I want everybody to know that I would be remiss without thanking the planning committee and all of the presenters tonight. This has been a gathering of people to put this on who are volunteers. Nobody got paid to do this. However, we all thought that we needed to come together to have a dialogue about solutions. And so from this event, we will have another event in November the 18th and 19th, because we're gonna get down to what I call the grit game. So we did a lot of presenting and had questions and discussions, but we got to get down to business. We got to start making appointments with Industrial Bank. We need to go and look at the expo, go into expo and look at Global Transcendence. And while you're doing that, look at the last speech that was made 52 years ago by Reverend King that talked about economic withdrawal. That is the purpose, and we have the power. I want to thank everybody, and I welcome you back to our next event on November the 18th and 19th. Thank you so very much, and good night.